I'm having a bit of a mare with this. It's... How the hell do I get back to there? Right. Fortunately, my boss has allowed me to give this presentation using the council's template. So, basically, nothing's happening. Thank God, there we go. I'm Neil Brown, currently a developer at Staffordshire County Council. Been there for 3 years, back there for 3 years now. Started coding professionally in '83 at a local Apple dealership on Apple IIs. But between Staffordshire County Council and the Apple, I've worked for in pensions calculation systems and a fraud investigation system before going back into the public service. Know many languages and environments, and former Mr. Universe and former victim on Naked Attraction. So, yeah. Do you recognise me? Do you recognise me? Yeah, I thought so. She's in the audience every time. So, right. So, well, oh yeah, and find me on LinkedIn. I'll show you. I'll show a QR code later on. So, okay. What I'm going to talk about tonight is Object-Relational Mapper. I can't see any of my notes without my glasses on. So, Object-Relational Mapper just basically takes a database and maps any of those entities from the database, puts them into entity data models, software-based entity models, a bit like POCOs, if you know POCOs, but possibly don't have the functionality. Makes database activities a lot easier to handle by simplifying the connections, the CRUD functionality, transactions, and it's basically simpler code than traditional, makes code simpler than traditional applications and frameworks such as ADO.NET, which is what the council use at the moment. But I'll show you an example later on. Commonly used ORM packages are something like Dapper. I've heard about it, never actually used it. NHibernate. A former colleague of mine used it, didn't like it at all, always slagging it off. And ORM Lite, but I'm going to be focusing on Entity Framework. Entity Framework, supported by Microsoft. It's not going to be going anywhere. It's not going to be dropped tomorrow. Excuse me. It's cross-platform. You use it on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. I've lost me the place now. It integrates well with things like technologies like Link. That Link can take query data from across all types of platforms, whether relational or non-relational, even XML. And of course, it works well with in-memory databases and Redis caching if you want to cache any of the data you're using. It's a very mature framework with extensive documentation and training material on the internet. And it's lightweight and open source. So, yes. But this is where it really comes into its own. It has providers for databases such as SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, Azure Cosmos DB, but also others like Oracle SQLite, DB2 for some reason. But also there are connectors to MailChimp and Salesforce, which I know about, but I wouldn't have thought you'd want to do that sort of thing. But you never know. I'm no expert in these things. Excuse me. So the basic concepts of Entity Framework are: you have a database, you have a series of entities created from that database via a scaffolding tool. and a database context. The database context manages the it's basically the glue between the database and the software entities, and it manages the caching, the transactions. What else does it manage? And it basically manages the relationships between the entities. A bit like, it's a soft version of the database. So there are two approaches to creating these entities, the models. There's the DB first, which is what we use at the council. It's easy to understand. It's the current, like I say, it's the current way we work. You can tweak the database before scaffolding all the entity models. But you've also got, excuse me, the code first, where you hand code the entities and the DB schemas, the relationships, and then migrate those to the database, and it builds a database for you. But it's tricky to debug, and there's a hell of a steep learning curve. But either way is valid. But I will. No, I won't. I'll talk about ADO. There's advantages over the over ADO.net that we're using at the council at the moment. It hides many of the complex details of an object and helps increase the efficiency of the code and the dev's throughput, which is actually there. Yes. And it allows devs to work with the data as objects rather than the SQL statements. Increases their productivity because there's an entity framework tool that helps create these data entities and the context, which holds the relationship details. What's next? I can't read the damn thing. So, oh yes, and the entity framework sits well with Link. Don't know if you know about Link. It's allows you to query databases with C#. I'll explain that shortly. But it also has, it's easy to bind data to a UI. And it's also very, very maintainable with with the code first approach. I've got onto that bit yet? No. Sorry about this. My notes are wrong. I've been changing them around this afternoon.
Wing it, you got it. Wing it, you got it.
I've got it. Right. Using the code first approach, it makes it easier to store, to create this schema and evolve the data over time using software and use a migration tool. But using the database first, it's easy to create the database first, spot any bottlenecks you're going to have, and allow something like a DB professional or DB admin to tweak the database before you actually start using it. So let's, yeah. Oh yeah, you should have the source control change history. So let me consider this database, sample database, with only 4 tables, obviously. We've got an employee. An employee has a department. An employee has a series of assets like a laptop or a mouse or a monitor. And there's an asset type which, hold on, I've got a pointer here. An asset has many assets, but each asset has an asset type like monitor, keyboard, laptop. I don't know what else. Yeah, keyboard, whatever. So, if you consider that database, you should be able to scaffold that database into software entities by, I love this, by, there's the command, you go run it in the CLI, you got the, what do they call it, connection string here, and the type of database you're going to be using, but you can specify, there's there's quite a lot of arguments you can attach, so you can output to a specific directory or a specific project. So let's go on to the, there we go, excellent. We've got the employee table. Once you've done the scaffolding, the entities, simple looking entities, would look something like this. So it's a one-to-one mapping field-wise, and you see that you've got a string job title here, which is nullable, so it maps it to a nullable type over here. And you've also got soft. This employee would have a series of assets. So you've got a soft virtual relationship there to be a list of assets. But also you've got a single department. So they are soft relationships back to other tables, back to other entities. And similarly, there's the asset. You've got an asset type, a one-to-one asset type, and an asset belongs to an employee even, not an employer. So if I just go on to, if you want to have a look at some seed, great, seed data, just to give you a no, I can't get it to go over. Come on, there we go. There we go. Can you see seed anywhere? Can't use it. There we go. There we go. He says seed database. There's some sample data that's going to go into a test database. So we've got a number of departments. The Seal Crown. He sounds like a cool guy. King of the Lizards. Mr. Jobsworth and Daniel Trice and Payne Besky. They'll all go into a database. We've got some assets there, which is, but like I say, what's that? That's a mouse. And some lucky person's got a 22-inch monitor and a laptop. That'll be going into seed the database with a bit of C# at the bottom there. Excuse me. Hopefully I'll show you a bit later on, if I've got enough time, to show you the test. Right. Oh, hold on. Yeah, there we go. Lovely. So here's a bit of C# that will just go and get all the employees. So it's very simple. You've got the database context. You've got the employees entity. As no tracking just basically tells the context to don't cache any of the details and just push it into a list and return the response. So this is going to be fun. Have I lost it? Oh, come on, back. Come on. This is going to be fun. So there we go. What was it? It was employee. So let's get all those employees. Unfortunately, it's different data because I messed up with the data earlier on today. So it's slightly different data, all in the same format. So there we go. Call a little web API to return some data in JSON format. It can be consumed by various other systems. Web expose it to the public, expose all your employees' details to the public. That'd be nice. But you can see here that you've got a list of assets that are empty and a department details that's null. That's because I didn't allow that that code to retrieve any of the department or asset details. So, oh, there we go. So, how to include the department details? It's very, very easy. You just use the include. So let's include all the department details. So it's exactly the same code, just with that new line, I think. Yeah, there we go. New line there. But this one's going to be called, this method's called get all employees with department details, obviously. So let's, no, where are you? This is horrendous. So let's scroll down a bit more in the I've just gone through the come this way. So what was it, Adam? With department details.
There we go, you got it.
That's the one. So let's give that a try and execute. Let's have a look at the JSON returned. And yes, he says, let's just bring that a bit. It's brought back the department, no assets, but all the department details for that, for Neil Brown and Dark Bolan. And he's also development. And Yeti Goose Screech, he's also development. But to prove that there are actually other departments there, he says, let's go to departments, open that up. Let's get some departments. Come on. Try it out. Execute. There we go. Development, support, HR, new desk. I think that's supposed to say news desk because I'm going to put Lois Lane in there later on. So, right, let's get back to the presentation. That's that. But like I say, it's very easy to to integrate with Link. And Link basically allows you to define a link definition using your language of your choice, VB.NET or C#. I'm not a big fan of VB.NET. And Link will then translate that query or that soft query to the underlying database of your choice, whether it's Postgres, SQL Server, MySQL, or any of those that I showed you earlier. Then it allows you, then it will execute that SQL against the database and materialize those .NET objects back from the database into your entity objects. What else is there? So the current method, like I say, we use ADO.NET at the council. It's very good. It provides access to relational, non-relational, or flat objects like XML. It was created in the mid-noughties. It's certainly not obsolete. It's very fast and reliable and mature, but it's a little bit wieldy. There's a lot to interpret. There's a lot to get your head around. And I've done a bit of an example here. Let's say I want to insert an employee. So you pass in the employee object that's been populated. You get the connection string. You open the connection with the connection string. You define a command, you set the command, the connection to be for that command to be the SQL connection. And then you get this sort of thing. I mean, we've only got five parameters there, but it looks so unwieldy. You have to define every one. You have to define the database type that you're going to put it into. And then you get things like date time and integer 32. Now, how many times have you taken a line, thought, well, that's exactly the same line as I'm going to need later on. So copy, paste it 20 times, change the parameter names, but you forget to change the date time type or the integer type, and it's supposed to be a decimal, and you put a decimal into an integer or an integer into a decimal, and you get horrendous answers back. So let's go on to the next one. Then you come on to adding the parameters to the SQL command. And then you have to define the string. This is an inline query string at the moment. Insert into employer, yada, 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 and all the parameter values. And then you have to say, right, I want to set that string to be the command text. And then you have to tell it, it's a command type text. And then you execute it. So 4 pages. And that looks quite good, actually. That's what it is in 6 point, so I could fit it on the screen. Compare that to the EF type entity framework approach. It just makes it so much easier. I mean, fortunately, I'm using a stored procedure. I'm using a stored procedure here called add employee SP. But everything's just so much easier to see. You just there. And it returns the new employee ID when it's been inserted. But personally, that's more maintainable. That's easier to read, easier to work out what's going on. So what we got here? This is, you want to know what SQL is being generated. So you can actually intercept what SQL is being generated by using to query string and turn it into make a string out of put the SQL into a string like that, and by intercepting it by putting a breakpoint in there, you can actually see what's being automatically generated from that query. And as you see, it's actually including the department details, and it's got its own inner join there. And that's another way. I don't know where this has come from. I thought I took that one out. Sorry about this. It hasn't saved what I've took out. This is the list of employees with all the details, including the department and the asset type. Yeah, I definitely took this out. So you can see that it's got 2 assets here. This is with a breakpoint. And the asset type is 4, which happens to be a monitor. So if I go back to that Swagger demo and run that, you should be able to see employees. I changed this afternoon. Fortunately, I've got a funny feeling it won't run. Whoops, execute. Oh no, it has. So there we go. That's funny. Something worked first time. So, so if you wanted to bring back all the details of all an employee's assets, it's very simple query. There's the assets. You've got, let's see, 1. Go down here. Where's my mouse? There we go. It's got a mouse and lives in development. Dark Bolan doesn't have any assets. because I haven't created any for him. And Yeti Goose Creature, he's got a tech thingy with serial number that, and it's a monitor. So, like I say, and a laptop. Lappy one. There we go. So that can be consumed by various systems as long as they can call a web API. So, oh, great. I've lost it again. Hey. So let's go on to the next. And that was actually the query that got generated by that query, by that call. But there are other ways of calling it, of viewing it. If you don't want to do a breakpoint, there's actually it goes into the debug or the output window of your IDE. So there we go. We've got selected. Oh, even more. Loads of SQL there. Oh, hold on. I'll put a circle around it. Great. And like I said, I think I said the EF sits on top of ADO.NET. And those two, they are very much like ADO.NET parameters, properties. So I suspect that is a bit of a giveaway. But whoever has developed a database with only 4 tables in it, I've done one too, and you'll see it in a bit. Say maybe 20, more like 100 tables with view objects sometimes. So what's a typical database? How many table views are in a typical database? I did a survey of the development tables at work, and I wasn't allowed to, excuse me, I wasn't allowed to write anything down because of the confidentiality. So, SPs, which one's that? Is that number 20? That's 20. Now, I reckon this is a database that was created 12 years ago, that was revamped from one that was created 15 years before that. So it's about 20-something years old. I think it was started in the late 1980s. And as you can see, you've got a small amount of tables. How many is that? About 45, 50, something like that. But quite a significant number of stored procedures. Now, I reckon it's a stored procedure for adding, deleting, and updating for each table. Because that's how they did it. So, number, what's that, 24. 24, you got high number of tables, but a low number of views and stored procedures, because that was using a system developed with a very early adopter of an ORM. It wasn't Entity Framework, but it was very similar. And similarly, you've got, what is it, number 5, DB5. Ooh, what's a DB5? Similarly, it uses Entity Framework, or not Entity Framework, an ORM. But this one has a very small amount of tables, but quite a high amount of views, because it's the relationships are very complex, and they wanted to flatten the data out of those relationships out with a lot of views. So that's why it's got a lot of views, but not many stored procedures. But again, that's using it was an early adopter of an ORM, but not very efficient. So here's a few stats. Tables up to 105, but averaged about 24. Up to 35, averaged number of views is 14. And stored procedures, 107 stored procedures. I suspect that's, which one was it? Database 20? 107, but an average of about 19. So nothing really jumps out there. So what does functionality those tables share? I reckon it's the CRUD functionality. The CRUD functionality pushes up that store procedure count, because you do one for every table. So how do we get over that? First step is to separate each software entity, separate a software manager for each of those database entities. So every table will have a database manager. Adding a bit of bespoke entity management, validation. The second step is create a generic manager to store and store all the CRUD functionality along with some helper methods. So, excuse me. What I'm going to show you in a bit is, hold on. Is some CRUD functionality pushed out into generic manager class. Each of the managers will then inherit from that generic manager any generic or specific functionality can be added to the entity manager or managers, any manager classes, meaning that any entity manager class will have both the generic and specific function available for consumption. I see the time's coming right up to an hour, so I'm going to skip through a lot of this. So what CRUD methods can we use? We can get all the entities of specific type, get entity by ID, get a number of entities, get all the entities or a number of entities by a predicate, by a condition. You want to add an entity, you want to update an entity, you want to delete. And I was thinking of exists and perhaps a pagination method as well. So I've written an interface to show the basically the contracts, the signatures for these, where the T type is the entity that's passed in, which will be used in the list of get all for get all, get a list from the find by condition, add the entity type, update the entity type, delete using the ID, and validate the entity type. So what's going on here? Oh yeah. So what I did was I created a little class and that creates a DB set of the entity you're passing. Get all, it just says basically get the entities, no tracking, to list and return it, push it out. Add similar, add the entity, delete, remove it if it already exists. If it exists. Excuse me. Create the common method. Again, create the common methods. Find by condition, pass in the predicate, push in the condition, etc. And then this is an example of how it can be used in the generic repository. Pushes in the asset. I've spilled water all over my laptop. And this is the basic manager with zero bespoke functionality, but that will allow you to using Entity Framework just to create an asset manager with CRUD functionality. Oops. There we go. Very easy. Passing the database contacts, passing the validator, and then define them their local variables. So I'll skip through this. So here we go. So call the create the entity manager class. Call the inherit from the generic repository using the employee, and pass any bespoke contracts into the manager that way. So there's an example of the 4 entities that we created with some bespoke classes there. So what's this? This is the yeah, this is just more contracts that can go into the employees. So anyway, coming up to the end now, thank God. Absolutely, the generic repository basically abstracts away the CRUD functionality. Each of the entity managers inherit from the generic functionality. Non-generic functionality goes into the manager class as normal. And the entity manager will, again, I've gone through this, have both the specific and bespoke methods available to it. So let's have a look at some other entity framework features. Views can be defined and created entities, software entities, just like tables can. You can have split queries. So if you've got an, what do they call it? A query that is creating has a complex relationship, causes perhaps something like a Cartesian explosion, you can say, I want to split that query. But you've also got compile queries. You basically set up a function called get employee compile query, and you pass in basically the context and the ID, and you can then set that bit of entity framework up using this, and once it gets called to the server like that, it will then be compiled on the server, on the database server, and it will be quicker the next time around. I haven't actually done any benchmarks with that, but I've heard that it works quite well. But like I say, I've got no proof of that. Again, entity framework calling stored procedures. We've seen that one before. ADO insert employee. I know what I know. That's why that gone back in there. So just doing a comparison between entity framework and ADO.NET. It requires a large amount of code to you need a large amount of code adjustment if you're going to swap database providers, SQL to Oracle, Oracle to SQL, SQL to Postgres. It's horrendous. I've done that sort of project before, and it's taken forever. So you need to handle manage the database connections, the data reads. You have to loop around the data. You've got to make sure all the data types and data conversions are correct. But also, you've got to be able to construct the SQL queries either in SSM and SQL Server Management Studio, and it's difficult to test unless you've got something like T-SQL2, which is a framework, a tool that allows you to test SQL stored procedures. So bear with me. It's like I say, it's mature, though it is a mature framework and devs know how to use it. It's old technology, and you may not be able to get devs to come and work for you if you're still using that without paying a salary premium. And more code, what does more code mean? More places to go wrong and more code to test. But it is performant as long as the SQL is performant. Entity framework abstracts away any interactions you're going to using .NET objects. There's a slight overhead performance, but it's easy to read. You have limited control over what the resultant SQL queries are, SQL statements are. And I've haven't proven it, that in large apps there is an additional overhead to that. You may get breaking changes if you update the framework in the future, but improvements are coming all the time. And it can be tested using a .NET testing framework like NUnit, XUnit, and you have the tools to be able to use in-memory database or a database that's spun up and torn down after every test. It is database agnostic. Theoretically, you can just point your connector to entity framework, and it should theoretically, work. Again, haven't proved it. You can integrate with stored procedures if required. There's a steep learning curve to any of those that have never been exposed to it or resistant to change. What's that say? So entity. Oh, I've done all this. Abstracts away the database complexity. Resultant models are easy to read. CRUD operations can be made easier. Database agnostic. I've taken this out. Why have they come back in? It's cross-platform. It's lightweight. It's compatible with versions C and VB.NET, and it's mature. There's tons of documentation on the internet, and I think that's about it for me. I'm sorry I've gone over a bit and I've waffled a bit, but if you need anything, there's that. Sorry about that.